What in the Wild is unlike most games that I tend to review, and that's because it is more of a game system than it is a game in and of itself. That's right, the Michigan Department of Natural Resources. This game was made by the government? Yeah, so it's unlike most games that I've reviewed because, one, it is a game system, and two, it's created by a government agency, and it's also made primarily to educate the young ones. Okay, so I guess it's got an educational spin on it. Let's just toss this. That's nice. Alright, so What in the Wild is unlike most games that I review because, one, it's more of a game system than any one set game. Two, it's created by a government agency. And three, it is an educational device. But what is What in the Wild? Essentially, it's just a small box that's filled to the brim with lots and lots of cards. Each card is either a species or a resource to sustain a species. Each species card has elements that show you what category the card belongs to, as well as what its needs are in terms of a habitat. The game comes with rules for 5 games, and I'm not going to go into each one, but they range in accessibility. Now, there's a memory game called Match It. My 4-year-old loved playing that. However, he couldn't handle a game like Build It, which is another game that comes included in this box. And despite the varying difficulty of each game, they all kind of have that core mechanic of building a sustainable habitat for species types. Look, this review is going to be far more nebulous than maybe something you're used to seeing on this channel, and the reason for that is because this is a nebulous game. Now, like, I was homeschooled all the way up until college, and I'm very familiar with adults trying to gamify education and make it fun, and I could sometimes see right through that, which is why I have some pretty terrible grammar songs stuck in my head. Old McPreposition was a farmer. He farmed into, over, and across. So what we see here is a targeted attempt by the government of Michigan to make learning about nature fun. And it largely works. Let's start with the negatives. And first and foremost, for a box full of cards, the fact that it comes with rules for 5 different games is can be a bit overwhelming to start with. And my biggest complaint was the fact that only one of the games, and the easiest game, that Match It game, was accessible for 2 players. Everything else required 3 or more players. And while that's great for a classroom setting, which arguably that's what this is made for, in a household setting, especially one that has just my wife and I and our young son right now, it made getting this to the table a bunch of times a little more difficult. Next, well, I love the graphic design of the game, and I like the way that the backs of the cards looks, I like the way that the cover looks. The artwork on the cards themselves are primarily just pictures, and it clashes a little bit, but in terms of artwork on the cards, I really do love the pictures of the species, but there were obvious budget constraints, I guess, on something like this, in that stock photography is used, there's satellite images used for particular cards, and it's functional. It works. It's not overly glamorous. And look, this isn't a positive or negative, but each game that you play of What in the Wild, regardless of which game you choose to play, is gonna have that medicinal tinge of education, of where it's, you know that even if the game's super fun, which a lot of these are very, very fun, it's got that underlying message that this is made to educate you. Now, as a kid that grew up in the homeschool community, I would have hands down 100% absolutely loved this if this was part of my schoolwork, part of my curriculum. I had a similar game to this that was essentially just the food chain. You'd play a card and have to play a card. There was a species that would eat the card that was played last. It was terrible. I loved it. It was a game that taught me a little bit. I mean, you basically pick the bigger animal. Decay eats everything you kind of wanted to get the decay card. But there was no pizzazz to it. Now, what Karen Cleveland understands is the fact that in order for this to really work, well, 1, you can't hide the fact that it's going to be educational, and 2, you need to make sure it's fun before everything else. And that's what she strived to do and has done with What in the Wild. And while it's overwhelming at first, it's cool that you can buy this game and you get essentially 5 games all in the same box. All in this tiny little rule book. It has rules for every single one, clear pictures, it tells you exactly how to play them. And here's the thing, with this being a system, a game system more than anything, once you know how these cards interact with each other, there's nothing that says you can't go buck wild and make your own game. Just how a deck of cards has a million different opportunities and possibilities, so What in the Wild also has a similar feel to it. While I don't live in Michigan, I love this idea, and I wish that we'd get to see something like this on a larger scale from other institutions. If it's your job to make something engaging and intriguing, be that being the Department of Natural Resources or an art museum, you have to be able to grip people's attention. And games are a fantastic way to do that. And not just cheap gift shop playing cards or reskin versions of Old Maid or Go Fish. What in the Wild has done is it's taken, first and foremost, it's taken a game and it's gotten you involved in it and gets you interested in it. And what you don't realize right off the bat is the fact that as you're playing, you are part of the game having to learn about these creatures. And it works. This is an example of an educational game done right. And I'd love to see more stuff like this out on the market.